So if we go back to the beginning, I mean, I had this lump on my right side for, gosh, it had been there for about 7 years, 7 or 8 years. No,
Wow.
maybe like 5 or 6 years actually. I actually noticed it right after the birth of my third. But it was a complicated birth. And when I mentioned it to my OB at our 6 month checkup, she just said because of everything my body had already been through and because I have zero family history of breast cancer,
Mm.
that it just wasn't something we were going to pursue and just keep an eye on it. And, she just said, if it changes, let me know. But otherwise, I don't even want to mess with you right now because your it just needs to recover.
Mm.
And so that was it. And then we had our fourth about a year and a half after that. And then we moved from New York to Virginia, and then we were only there for about 3 months. And we thought, okay, maybe we'll try to have one more kid, and I think that's kind of we'd be done after that. And fortunately for us, we've just never had problems getting pregnant. But oddly enough, for those 3 months, we didn't get pregnant, and so I just really felt like that was God's way of shutting the door on that, and that I felt like, okay, like we're done with, we've got four, and we're happy and we're blessed, and so that felt fine. And then we moved after those 3 months, and then surprisingly, all of a sudden, it was this huge surprise that we were pregnant, and so we kind of like shifted gears from thinking we were done. We had sold all of our baby stuff, and then now we were pregnant, and it was this, and we went from like being okay with not having another kid, and then now being just having to deal with the surprise of all that. And I only say that because I mean she was just a total provision, because at my 38-week appointment, the night before my 38-week appointment, I noticed that the lump had gotten bigger and it felt different. And so I said, well, I'll ask my doctor since I'll already be in there for my 38-week appointment. But had I not been pregnant, I would have never gone into the doctor just for that lump. Like it wasn't anything, again, like I have no risk factors for cancer. I have no family history of it. I was fairly healthy. And so I really would have never gone in to get that checked. Except for the fact that I was already going in, I was already at the doctor. And so I said, since I'm already here, just go ahead and check it. And yeah, it just snowballed from there. And we had the biopsies, we had the different scans, and I mean, multiple times I had doctors tell me, well, it looks like cancer, but because you're young and you don't have any risk factors, it could be anything, and because you're pregnant, it could be anything.
Mm.
But the doctors would say, but if you were a 75-year-old lady, I would tell you it's definitely cancer.
Wow.
So then we just had that, odd like waiting period of trying to figure out what was going on, and whether or not we should just go ahead and be induced. I was already at 38 weeks anyway, and just waiting for the biopsy results. And then once we found out the biopsy results and found out that it was cancer, everything just went into, like just double speed. Like everything just fast forwarded. I'm sure you've been there with, it's just, you just get inundated with all these different appointments and the doctors and specialists and, just a bunch of these appointments and scans and lots of needles and tests.
Mm.
And I mean, it was just kind of a big blur. But the first thing we did is we were induced. And so the first time around, the induction did not work, which was kind of comical.
Oh my
She
goodness.
wasn't ready to come out. And then the second time around, we had a great birth. It's probably the best birth I've had, and I've had some complicated ones. And so then, after that, the doctors they said we would wait about 6 weeks for me to recover before beginning any sort of treatment. And in that time, we did a lot of genetic testing, and they were trying to figure out if I would do surgeries, and then if I did surgeries, what type of surgeries, and then also if I would do chemo in conjunction with it, like before or during. There were a lot of questions in the air, and so until we got back the genetic testing results, we were just trying to think through what our options would be. And so again, that 6 weeks that I got after she was born, and before we decided we would, take a step towards some sort of treatment, it was a huge blessing because I had those 6 weeks, and I was so laser focused on. One, I wanted to nurse my baby for as long as I could. So that was the huge focus for those 6 weeks. But also, I had this time where I said, well, I don't want to sit here and just wait. Like, I want to figure out what we can do in the meantime. And that's when I just started digging into the research. And that's when I started looking at all the, holistic options. And a lot of it really for me started with nutrition, because I thought the only thing I can really control right now is what I eat. So let's figure out what I can do to get my body, one, ready for the surgery, and two, what kind of foods will support my body to fight cancer. And that's how it all started. And even on my first surgery after my baby was born, which was for my bilateral mastectomy, they put in a port. So up until the very end, we didn't know if we were going to do chemo and radiation or go the alternate route. And I always like to mention that because I just want people to know that there's a lot of grace in which course of treatment you choose. And I don't think anybody realizes how hard those decisions are until you are facing those decisions. And it was a really tough time of praying and trying to figure out what we were going to do. We had my bilateral mastectomy, and it was a really rough surgery. A lot of things went wrong that shouldn't have gone wrong. I ended up bleeding out, and so they had to put my surgery on pause, and we had to get 8 transfusions, and then I ended up in the ICU. And the surgery just ended up being a lot more complicated than what we had anticipated. We recovered from that, and then I came back in for my checkup after the first big surgery, just thinking that my doctor would check my stitches and, say there's no infection, it's looking fine. And then it was another blow. When he told us that they hadn't gotten all the cancer, and so we would have to go in for a second surgery, I will say that's probably one of the lowest points of my life, because I felt like we had just barely survived the first surgery. And I had this newborn, and I still couldn't hold her, and I had friends that had flown in, and they were just caring for our family around the clock. And then to find out that I wasn't going to move on with recovery, but I would have to go in for another procedure. So just the physical challenge of going through the surgery again and the recovery, but just also the mental and emotional aspect of thinking that I would have to go under again. And, things went, pretty terribly on the first surgery. So there was definitely a lot of fear associated with that second surgery. But we did it. We got to the second surgery, and that's when I saw the angel. I can talk about it more later. But I woke up, and that was the only thing on my mind was the angel, and and then I was trying to figure out if I was going crazy, and if I had lost my mind, or if what I had seen was real. And then in the meantime, we've still got the physical reality of I'm recovering from the second surgery now. And then we go in for another checkup with our doctor, and believe it or not, he says again that they haven't gotten all the cancer. And so now we're facing the possibility of a third surgery. And I will say right now that my doctor is phenomenal, my surgeon. I have complete trust in him. He's a great surgeon. And they even did the frozen biopsies in the middle of surgery where, they send the initial result off to the lab, and then they tell them whether or not, they think they've gotten all the cancer. And then they continue on with the surgery until they think they've gotten it all. It just happens that both times the lab is wrong. And I don't think it wasn't the fault of my surgeon. It wasn't the fault of the lab. It's just how things played out. So anyway, we were facing the third surgery and trying to figure out what to do. And at this point, because it was the third time, my surgeon wasn't sure what this next surgery would look like. So it could be a pretty radical surgery of removing a good bit more of my chest, because we didn't know where it ended. And then we weren't sure if now it had been spreading through my skin. There were, again, a lot of unknowns in the air, and having a newborn, and she's our fifth. And so it was just a lot going on during that time. And that's when we, what's that?
How far, with the original biopsy and scans, how big was the cancer? Where had it gone to?
It was originally, they put me at a stage 2. and they were waiting to see if it had spread to my lymph nodes, and then that would determine, if I was going to be a stage 3 or not. But during my surgeries, they confirmed that it hadn't spread to my lymph nodes. So it was interesting because when I was pregnant and I had my first scan and they measured the tumor, they put me at a stage 2. And then as I was doing all this research and learning about hormones and learning about food and nutrition, and then we had my second scan right before my surgery, but after I had the baby. So my hormone levels had plummeted, and then the size of the tumor had changed enough that then I was at a stage 1 pending whether or not it had spread to my lymph nodes. So it was really interesting to see how just that change in hormones was affecting the tumor.
Wow.
Yeah. So then we were back at trying to decide whether or not we'd go in for a third surgery. And that's when we kind of just took a step back. And that's when we started looking at trying to get a second consult, just getting some more opinions of what we should do. Because we had no idea what we should do at that point. And again, my surgeon, to his credit, he said, this has never happened to me before. And he himself went down to the lab and checked my biopsy results, and he just wanted to see it for himself because he felt horrible about the possibility of a third surgery too, and was very sympathetic to that. And he said that he thinks he saw like a hair's width of a clean margin, and he said it's not the standard that medicine goes by, but that for him, based on the labs that he saw and the results that he saw, he thought it could be possibly a hair's width of a clear margin. So again,
my goodness.
I know, just
not
a lot of unknowns up in the air. And so again, I have the port in at this point, and we're just praying. And I was just really open to, if God wants me to walk the road of chemo and radiation, then we will walk the road of chemo and radiation. And if He doesn't want us to, then we won't. And I feel like things were just so up in the air that really I just wanted a very, just some sort of affirmation from Him on which path to choose. Because I know people that have done all types of treatments, and I know people that have survived them all, and then I know some people that haven't. And so, there was no known answer at this point. So we scheduled a second consult at MD Anderson just to get a second set of eyes on my pathology report and get an opinion from another doctor just to see what they would say. And right before we left on that trip, I remember praying, and I just asked God that He would put my husband and I on the same sheet of paper, just that we would have the same plan in mind when we came home, and that we would both be comfortable and confident with what we chose. Because the last thing I needed was for one of us to not be all in with whichever treatment we chose. And so we went to MD Anderson, and I know, gosh, there's so many people I know that have had a phenomenal experience at MD Anderson. I was getting texts from people all over saying, it's going to be great. You're going to have a great experience. You're dealing with the varsity team. It's going to be awesome. They're great. It's wonderful. And it's just odd that our experience was not wonderful at all. I mean, the clinic itself is an impressive building, and they have an incredible staff. But somehow our pathology report got lost along the way. So they had to ask them to resend it. So in a really neat way, we had 2 days where we were already at MD Anderson. We had arrived there, and we had 2 days with nothing to do while my pathology report was being FedExed again. And so it was neat because for 2 days, my husband and I had nothing to do when we had just been dealing with all this craziness. And I just feel like God, they carved out that time for us to just take a deep breath and just regroup ourselves. And we were literally forced to do nothing for 2 whole days. But anyway, so then we had our second consult and met our doctors and talked to the nurses there. And the appointment didn't go the way that we thought it would, and the answers didn't really satisfy us. And when they started talking about statistics, my husband he's an analyst, and so he knows statistics really, really well. And he would just kind of push back on them and say, that's not what those numbers actually mean. And,
Wow.
and in our minds, we said, well, I don't really care about the 5-year survival rate. Like, I want to look at the 40-year survival rate. Like, how does this look? What's the long term? What do you think caused this? So how can we prevent it? Like, how can we go on the offensive after treatment instead of just waiting for another bump to be discovered?
Right.
So anyway, we just got through with our appointment, and when we walked out of that building, I remember looking at him and I just said, so, what did you think of that? And that's when he said, well, I'm way less more convinced about chemo than I was before. And that's exactly how I've been feeling. And that just felt like the big answer to prayer, where God put us on the same plan. And when we went home, we just decided, okay, we're not, chemo and radiation is off the table for now. And we're going to pursue a holistic route. And then, I had to have that conversation with my oncologist to tell him we weren't going to do that, and with my surgeon. And, all things considered, they were very gracious about it, given the fact that they really don't have any nutrition training in medical school. So for them to, see me doing that was a little bit that was not within the realm of what they're familiar with and what they practice. And so their response was pretty gracious considering all that.
What were the statistics like, or the 5-year survival rate versus 40, and, what did the studies really show, and how did you present that information to your oncologist?
So we were trying to figure out how many years or what percentages of survival that the chemo could add on, and then what percentage radiation would add on, and then what percentage tamoxifen would add on. Because we were just trying to figure out, how do we do this? Because there's a lot of risks that come with it, and they did tell me that I would probably have heart failure afterwards. And so we were just really trying to figure out, how much of this is necessary? What's the payoff? So, I think when we added in tamoxifen, my survival percentage went up either 0.5 or 1%. Wow. And so we said, for 5 years of taking this drug that has known side effects, I'm not willing to do that just for a 0.5 to 1% gain. And then, with chemo, the percentages went up by maybe 40, and then I think radiation added on a 20%. And so that's kind of how they broke it down to us. But my husband, again, having just done a lot of analysis in his work, we just looking at the numbers, he said, well, anybody could get to the 5-year mark, but there's nothing that shows what are the recurrence rates? What if it comes back at 5 years and 1 day? Well, according to your statistics, you're still counting them as a 5-year survivor. And so he said, that's not what we want. We don't want 5 years to survive, and then 5 years and 1 month you die of heart failure. He just said, we want to look at the long picture. I want to be around to see my kids' grandkids. I want to see my grandchildren doing their school plays. We want the long picture here, and that's really where the differences came up. And so, it was just, his perspective on it was different, and ours was just different from a lot of the staff that we encountered. So.
And what was your, what type of breast cancer was it that these?
It was invasive breast cancer.
Okay. So they had the actual studies on that invasive breast cancer with these different treatment modalities.
Yep, and what's interesting is, and again, MD Anderson, I know people that have had just rave reviews about MD Anderson, so I don't want to give it a bad name necessarily, but it was almost like my cancer was so common, sadly, it was so common even though I was young, that it wasn't even that interesting to the doctors, whereas some other people that I know that have gone there had some rare type cancers, and I think that just excited the doctors a little bit more, if that makes sense. Yeah. I don't know. I was seen as such a routine case, whereas, for anybody going through cancer, nothing is routine. So anyway, but again, just some people have loved it there and have had great experiences there. So after we, told our doctors about our course of treatment and kind of talked it through with them, and we explained to them, it's more than us just not just sitting around holding hands, singing Kumbaya. Like, we have a plan here. I had a holistic doctor, met with her, did a whole panel of just labs, and that was really eye-opening. And that's probably one of the top things I would recommend to anybody that's going to start treatment, whether you do conventional or whether you do the alternate route. I would say just get a whole bunch of labs done to figure out your micronutrient density levels, whether or not you have certain genetic mutations. Like, I found out I have the homozygous version of the MTHFR mutation, which I think played a big role in my diagnosis. And all of that, really, whether you're doing conventional or alternative treatment, all of that comes into play, and all of that helps. It's information that you need to know going into whatever treatment you choose. So anyway, we did that, and then we just kind of tackled it from the point of nutrition and changing our diet and lifestyle and toxic chemicals. So yeah, we kind of changed everything around. And for, I'd say, about the first 2 to 3 years, we were in a pretty intense treatment mode, and then we moved about a year ago. And I feel like since then we've entered more of a maintenance mode, where it's, we've got to be able to maintain what we're doing, and it can't be as stringent as before.
Right. So what were your blood tests like? Or for heavy metals, did you do a urine test? Or did you do heavy metals?
I didn't even know about the heavy metals at the time. And yeah, so I wish I had done that, but we didn't do that one. But I'd done my micronutrient density levels, and, my vitamin D was fairly low, even though we were living in a really sunny place. But
that's interesting.
Yeah, so my vitamin D was really low, not super low, but lower than it should have been. And then I had that MTHFR genetic mutation, so which affected some of my vitamin Bs. So those were low. And then my homocysteine levels were off. I think they were too high, and that, again, it can be related to the MTHFR. And so it was really eye-opening to see that what I looked like on the outside, because I was a fairly fit person, worked out a lot, that was definitely different from what I looked like on the inside with my lab results. And that was a big shift in mentality, because I used to think I can eat whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want, as long as I just work out enough, and if I can stay the same size, and if I can run just as fast, or do whatever physical achievement. If I can do all that, then I'm healthy, and that to me meant health. Whereas looking back, that's not health. That may mean you're a fast runner. It may mean you're a certain size, but that's all it means. It doesn't mean that on the inside your body is really thriving. And so it was a total shift in mentality to really focus on being healthy from the inside out.
And what kind of doctor was your holistic doctor?
It's interesting, actually, because I'd heard about her probably like a few months before everything happened. And I didn't really think much of it, because she's actually an anti-aging doctor.
Oh, okay.
And so in my mind, I thought it was like cosmetic stuff. Yeah. I thought it was like wrinkles and sagging skin. And so I didn't think much of it until I heard somebody who went to her, and they had a bunch of lab results done, and she really tackles anti-aging from the point of really just being healthy from the inside out. It's not having to deal with all these chronic diseases that a lot of people attribute to just aging. And so from that perspective, we definitely met, saw eye to eye, and that made sense. And I thought, okay, now I get it. I don't want to age in terms of just chronic diseases and having to deal with like injuries and whatnot. So I want to age gracefully. And so, yeah, so she's an anti-aging doctor.
and how did you find the confidence to see her for your treatment or guidance?
So I had looked into a bunch of different doctors all over, even had some phone calls with some doctors on the phone, and it came down to the fact that with 5 kids and a newborn, and my husband still had to work, she was the closest one to us, and I had known somebody else that had already gone to her. So to us, it just she was like our main option, and I knew she would do the blood work and that she was pretty thorough. So she was our option. There were a couple other doctors that were probably like 1 to 2 hours away that we would have considered as well, but they also had long waiting lists. So I mean, it was just the most practical option that fit for us.
Okay. And so you haven't had any sign of cancer since your surgery, correct?
Yep, we've had a couple scares, and that'll get your heart racing. But they ended up being other things. Like once I had a bump on my left side that I noticed, but turns out it was just a stitch on the inside that had somehow gotten caught up. And so they just ended up removing that. So that's all that one was just a stitch. And then I had another bump that was under my right armpit, which of course is not a place where you want anything. And they've checked that probably like 3 times now, and all it is my lymph nodes, and I think it may have just been affected during my surgeries when they removed some lymph nodes. So yeah, aside from those 2 scares, we've had no signs of recurrence. Praise God.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah.
And when was your last surgery?
My last surgery, I did do reconstruction.
Okay.
So with all the reconstruction, my last surgery was probably about, I'm trying to think, maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago, just to finish up the different phases of reconstruction.
Okay. What about the one where they actually removed the cancer, or attempted to?
Yeah, I know, right? The first attempt or the second attempt.
Yeah.
That was in December of 2014.
Okay.
Was the first that was the bilateral mastectomy.
So that was about over 3 years ago. 3.5.
Yep, almost 3.5 years ago. So yeah, that was a huge milestone.
And do you know what the risk of recurrence is for your type of cancer?
Gosh, it's hard to say because of my treatment being so different. Because of the fact that, I mean, if I had done the chemo radiation and tamoxifen, I could probably pull up a chart and give you what my percentage would be. But because of my treatment options, I don't know what my percentage of recurrence is. But it is interesting that with all the appointments I would have with the doctors, they would show me this chart and give me these numbers, and then they would say, but because of your age and because you're young, your chance of recurrence is much higher because you have that many more years where it could possibly come back. So yeah, I don't actually know the numbers given our choice of treatment that we decided on.
So you're just walking out in faith that what you're doing is gonna prevent a recurrence, and I guess in a similar way I'm doing the same thing, and a lot of people are. Surgery can be a really important part of the healing process, but then that's not standard medical care to have surgery and then not do something afterwards. So that's brave of you to do that. And I know that your story has inspired a lot of people and will continue to inspire people as they read about it and hear about it. And I just pray for continued healing for you. I think you have a wonderful story. And one of the things I love the most is what you're doing now, and how could you talk about the Prodigal Table and how that came about and what you're doing with it now?
Yeah, I mean, it's small, but for a few years as we were sharing, going through our journey, and once people realized what we were doing for the treatment and how a lot of it revolved around food and just lifestyle changes, and it's the fact that what we were doing were things that anybody could do. And my passion to tell people about what we were doing really came from the fact that I just wanted people to look at me, and I wanted them to say, learn from me. Don't go through cancer yourself in order to make these changes. Just make them now. I mean, prevention is so much better than treatment, but our culture doesn't really reward, prevention. It's not the sexy way of doing things. Right. And so that, I was just continually talking to people about what I was doing, and I just realized that really a lot of what I was doing now, especially once I entered into the maintenance mode, it didn't apply to people with just cancer. I mean, it applied to people with a lot of other chronic issues. I mean, a lot of adrenal issues, hormone issues, skin issues, digestive issues. Like it can help everyone. And so as people were asking me, or I was sharing my story, my husband kept saying, you should make a website, you should make a website. And I kept saying, I don't want to make a website. I don't want to make a website. I am not a techie computer person at all. And so, yeah, I was praying one day and I said, God, if you want me to do this, because for my husband, that really, he never pushes me into anything. So for him to keep saying something, I thought, okay, well, God, if you want me to do this, you're going to have to open up some time for me, because I've got 5 kids. Like, I don't have extra time to fit in all of a sudden this website and then to create it. And I kid you not when I say about 2 hours later, I got a call on the phone from this preschool that I had put my girls on the waiting list for. And when I say we were on the waiting list, like, we weren't the first ones on the waiting list. Like, we were like number 10 or something on the waiting list. Anyway, they called like 2 hours later and they said, hey, a spot opened up. Would you like your girls to come? And I thought, oh gosh, that means I have to do the website. So wow. Yeah, that was the final push to creating the website. I will say multiple times I felt like throwing the computer, because again, I'm not a techie person. So to create that was a big challenge. But really the idea, we had friends visiting us and I just told them the concept of it. And I said, it's a place where treatment isn't just about food. It's not just about, cutting chemicals out. Like, it's holistic. And a lot of that also involves faith. And that's a huge part of it. And so we were just talking about it and I hadn't figured out a name yet. And she said, well, it sounds like, when you're describing it to me, she said, it just sounds like a table. Like, people come together and you discuss, and it's an open place and there's no judgment and a lot of just grace. And I thought, yeah, a table like that. So then we had that word in mind, the table. And then as I just read the story, one of my favorite stories in the Bible is just about the prodigal son. And then Tim Keller also has an amazing book about the prodigal God. And just all of that really came together for me. And just saying, I feel like a lot of times there can be a lot of judgment around the treatment options people choose. There can be a lot of, just like, oh, I can't believe you did that. Or like, wow, like, there can just be a lot of judgment is what I've seen. And so I just went with the theme of, prodigal, because I thought there's just a lot of grace here. Like, nobody knows until we get to heaven what the right option was. And for now, we're just all doing the best that we can. And we just need to be open and discuss. And also I would love to be able to somehow see the influence between holistic or functional medicine and conventional medicine, where they're no longer in competition with each other and we're not fighting against each other, but that like it can work together, that these two modalities can work side by side. And so anyway, yeah, that's how I came up with the Prodigal Table, and just a place for people to feel welcome, lots of grace. I try to share information when I can. Again, it's small. I have a limited amount of time, so that's what the Prodigal Table is.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for giving up, stepping out in faith and doing something that is uncomfortable for you. What was your career before you had all the kids? And
I was active duty in the Army, so I was an engineer, and then my last job I was with an aviation unit. So wow. Yeah, it was a total 180 to then have kids who don't listen to me, who just do their own thing. It's been great, and I feel like that has been a huge blessing. Is I really struggled with becoming a stay-at-home mom, and I just kind of want to throw that out there for other moms who are struggling in those little years, because it's demanding, it's super refining for your character. And a lot of times I just kept searching for different jobs or ways to kind of get out of it. But, when my diagnosis hit, I tell people that's one of those times where my entire life just came into focus. And I thought, my kids, my family, and then friends, like that is my number one priority. So that's what I'm fighting for, to be around for them. And any job, I'm dispensable. Anybody can do any job that I could potentially have out there. But nobody can fill the role that I have as their mom for as long as God allows me to be their mom. So, just want to throw that out there for some of the moms who might be struggling.
Oh, that's beautiful. Wow. So how can people connect with you?
They can just go to jenhartney.com. And there's a way to contact me on there, and they can just email me, or the Prodigal Table. There's a page on Facebook, and feel free to reach out. And again, it's been up for just 6 months. We're small, and that's okay. I'm fine with being small right now because that's just my plate. That's all I can handle right now. But I am excited to think of new ways to generate just some fun things to do. Like I want to do some giveaways. I want to make the things that I've done easier for other people, so they don't see it as such a this huge challenge or this obstacle where I could never do that. And I tell people, yes, you can. Like anybody can do the changes I've made. I'm nothing extraordinary. It's anybody can do it. And so just connect with me. And I love to give people tips on how to do stuff because I didn't learn how to cook growing up, and I didn't know anything about food or nutrition. So you don't know what you don't know. So I'm happy to share information and help folks along.
I love this one line you have in the Cancer Tutor article. It says, well, we can't just chow down a bunch of kale and broccoli all day. This has to taste good.
Yes, it's true because, if it doesn't taste good, people don't want to eat it. And I get it that's maintenance mode. When you're in survival mode, you have to shift your mentality a little bit and realize that sometimes in nutrition, you have to look at it as fuel for your body. Like it is just fuel for your body. But then as you slowly start transitioning out of that, food should taste good. I believe God gave us food to taste good and that he delights when we enjoy the food that he gave us. And so I love making healthy food actually taste good so people want that. Like that's my motivation with my kids is I want them to be like, yeah, I like carrots because they taste good because I've made them a way in which they taste good, and not to always have this association with like broccoli and that they don't want it because it doesn't taste good. When in reality, any vegetable, if you prepare it the right way, they taste really, really good.
Yeah, that's cool. So the recipes that you're sharing now, they're more for like people in the maintenance phase and prevention of cancer or?
Most of it would be, I have a few things on juicing, and that's what I did a lot of juicing for the first year, especially when we were in the intense treatment mode. So it's a little bit of both, but most of what I share right now will be a lot of stuff that anybody can do. It's maintenance mode. And it's interesting because, people will say, well, are you paleo? Are you this? Are you that? And I always feel like it's this long explanation of, no, it's a nutrient dense diet, and I can't really put a label on what it is. I think the closest way I could describe it is maybe if people looked at the Weston Price diet, and it's fairly similar to that. But yeah, so.
Cool. And I'm sure some people want to know exactly what you did on your healing journey, nutrition wise. So you did juicing. How many juices and what kind?
Gosh, we did juicing a lot. I was probably doing 2 huge containers of it, twice a day. And I would throw anything I could in there, but usually it was definitely carrots, celery, cucumbers. What else was there? Sometimes a green apple or a lemon juice, or sometimes a lime, beets I had in there. And so it's usually some sort of combination of all those. And then I was doing a lot of smoothies. And so I would try to save my leafy greens for the smoothies just because you get a lot more out of them with the fiber in a smoothie versus, you only get a few tiny drops if you put a bunch of kale into a juicer. Yeah. And so it was a lot of juicing. And I know some people really advocate a vegetarian diet for fighting cancer. And I tried that when we were trying to figure everything out, but honestly, I didn't feel good on a vegetarian diet, and so I don't have a heavy meat diet right now. But we do have meat, probably chicken, once or twice a week, and then fish once a week, and then we probably have red meat once every 2 weeks or so. So I do have a little bit of meat in our diet, but not a ton. So yeah, not paleo, not vegetarian. It's just nutrient dense. I just try to make all of our meals really heavy on nutrients. I just cut out refined sugar. That was probably the number one thing that we cut out was just went cold turkey on the refined sugar, no conventional dairy. And then for the grains, I started making sourdough. So I'll make a lot of sourdough at home. It's already it's fermented, and a lot of fermented foods, addressing a lot of your gut health. And then just for me personally, addressing the MTHFR genetic mutation. So, and for that, I do take a supplement. So I try not to take a whole ton of supplements. I only really take what I feel like my body really needs, because I mean, nobody wants to be on supplements for the rest of their life either. So yeah, I hope that's specific enough.
Yeah. And regarding gut health, did you do any kind of gut health protocol, or did you need that?
Um, I didn't need it. I didn't need a huge protocol other than just going really heavy on the probiotics, supporting my liver, taking silymarin or dandelion tea, just a lot of stuff again, and that like cilantro, a lot of stuff that would just help my liver, because I was focusing on detoxing. So just my gut, a lot of probiotics, and then a lot of detoxing through my liver. So that's what we focused on. And I mean, I tell people all the time, once we're talking about like cancer and, my mastectomy, I said, we kind of go into the territory of being okay with talking about poop. So I figured, like I really judge it based on like, how does your bowel movement look? And if you're having regular ones and they look a certain way, then to me, that's just kind of what I went off of. So that was my basic protocol, nothing too specific. But yeah, so that was it.
That's a good note to end on.
Yeah. Check your poop, guys.
So, well, actually, I'd rather, just further, I just think it's really wonderful how God answered your prayers through everything. And do you have any final words about that, how God helped you on this journey?
Yes, I mean, it was, apart from him, I couldn't do any of this stuff. And I tell people all the time, I would never have chosen the route of cancer. I don't think anybody would. But given what I have come to know about him and what I've learned about him, like I wouldn't trade the stuff that I learned about him through this journey. And in Romans, I think it's chapter 8, I'd have to double check, but it says, he works things out for all things for our good. And if somebody had said that verse to me while I was going through treatment, I probably would have punched them. But I've come to realize that when it talks about for your good, the good that they're talking about is the good in terms of your heart and relationship with God. And when you look at it from that perspective, everything was used for my good, because I came to know God in a much deeper way, in a much more personal way, in a way where I dealt with a lot of just processing through trauma in my past, and just realizing that his love for me is unconditional, and that sometimes it takes going through a crazy valley like cancer and then almost dying in order to realize like the depths of his love for me. And so I would just encourage people with that, that your circumstances shouldn't define how you see God. I just pray that you would know God, and that would help you look at your circumstances through a different lens.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Amen. Well, thank you, Jen, so much for this interview. And I look forward to seeing what all that God has in store for you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for reaching out. I appreciate it. It's super encouraging to meet other survivors and thrivers and people who have faith.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thanks.